I was 23 when Michael Donovan destroyed my life with one lie. A single calculated lie that cost me my career, my reputation, my sanity, and 5 years of my life locked away in a psychiatric institution where no one believed me. But they eventually let me out. And I spent the last 7 years rebuilding myself, transforming. And now I am no longer the naive girl he broke. I am his worst nightmare. And he still doesn't know I'm coming. My name is Natalie Cross, and today, at 35, I am sitting in the lobby of the Donovan Media Group office in Manhattan, a glass and steel skyscraper that symbolizes everything Michael Donovan has built in the last 12 years. And I am here under the name Natasha Crawford, a public relations consultant hired to help the company navigate a recent image crisis. And in 15 minutes, I am going to shake the hand of the man who completely destroyed my life 12 years ago, and he won't recognize me. Because the Natalie Cross he knew, the 23-year-old junior marketing assistant with dreams of building a career in advertising, that girl no longer exists. She was systematically erased, first by him, then by the system. And now, in her place is a woman who has spent 7 years meticulously planning every move of this moment. To understand why I'm here, why I dedicated nearly a decade of my existence to this singular purpose, I need to go back to 2012, when I was young, ambitious, and stupidly confident. I was working at Sterling & Associates, a respected advertising agency in New York, as a junior in the marketing department. It was my first real job after graduating from NYU with a degree in communications, and I was determined to prove my worth, to climb the ranks, to make a name for myself in that competitive industry. And Michael Donovan was a senior vice president at Sterling. He was 31 at the time, handsome, charismatic, brilliant at presentations, and everyone in the agency saw him as the future CEO, as the golden boy who couldn't fail. And he was married to Amanda Donovan, the heiress to a technology fortune whose money and connections had helped Michael accelerate his career. And everyone knew that the marriage was more a strategic partnership than romance, but it worked for both of them. She had a presentable husband, he had access and capital, and I would never have gotten involved with him, never would have crossed that line. But Michael had other plans. Michael saw something in me, maybe my ambition, maybe my naivety, maybe just an opportunity. And he started giving me special attention, including me in important meetings, asking for my input on campaigns, making me feel seen, valued, and I misinterpreted it. I interpreted it as mentorship, as professional recognition, when in reality it was grooming. It was carefully orchestrated manipulation. And then came the project, the big campaign for an important client, a technology startup that could make or break Sterling's quarter. And Michael put me on the team, a huge honor for someone at my level. And we worked long hours together, often alone in the office after everyone else had gone home. And Michael started confiding in me about his marriage, about how cold Amanda was, about how trapped he felt, about how I was different, how I was genuine. And I should have seen the manipulation. I should have recognized the classic pattern, but I was 23. And no one had taught me to identify predators in expensive suits. And one night, after a particularly long work session, Michael kissed me. And I froze because I knew it was wrong. I knew he was married. He was my superior. But he was persuasive, said his marriage was ending anyway, said he had real feelings for me, said I was special. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel special. So I made the monumental mistake of reciprocating. And we began an affair that lasted 3 months. An affair we kept absolutely secret because his career depended on it, because I feared judgment. And during those 3 months, Michael was attentive, romantic, promising he would leave Amanda, promising we would have a future together. And I believed every word because I was young, because I wanted to believe, because he was convincing. And then everything fell apart in a way I could never have predicted. It happened on a Friday in October, a day that is etched in my memory with painful clarity. Michael called me into his office at the end of the day, said we needed to talk. And when I walked in, he was different, distant, not meeting my gaze. And he said we had to break up, that Amanda had found out about the affair, that she was threatening divorce, that he couldn't lose her. And I was devastated, of course, but also relieved in a way, because the secret relationship was consuming me. And I said, okay, I said I understood, that I would be professional. But then Michael said something that changed everything. He said he was worried about my stability. He said I had become obsessed with him, that he was worried about what I might do. And I looked at him confused because none of that was true, because if anyone had pursued the relationship, it was him. So, I said he initiated everything, that I had evidence, emails, texts, and the expression on his face changed. It became cold, calculated. And he said calmly that there was no evidence, that he had been careful not to leave a paper trail, that it was my word against his. My blood ran cold because I realized in that moment that I had been set up, that the whole thing was planned. And then Michael explained how it would be. He was going to tell HR that I had made unwanted advances, that when he rejected me, I became unstable, starting to harass him. And Amanda, to save the marriage, had agreed not to pursue divorce if he dealt with the situation, meaning me. And I said no one would believe him, that colleagues knew we worked closely together constantly. But Michael smiled. That smile that used to make me feel special now made me feel sick. And he said he had already planted seeds, casual comments to colleagues about how I was acting strange, how I was too focused on him, how he was concerned about my judgment. And in the next few hours, everything happened exactly as Michael promised. HR called me in, presented allegations, said Michael was claiming harassment. And I tried to explain, tried to tell the truth, but Michael had prepared well. There were emails I didn't remember sending, drafts saved on my work computer with inappropriate content. And I realized too late that Michael had access to my login, that he had planted evidence. And Amanda Donovan herself appeared, poised and composed, saying she felt sorry for me, that I clearly needed help. Within a week, I was fired for misconduct. My reputation in the industry destroyed because Michael ensured the story leaked. And I tried to fight, tried to find a lawyer, but no one wanted to take a case against the Donovans, against their money and connections. And my parents, simple people from the Midwest, were horrified, not understanding how their daughter could have done this. And I tried to explain the truth, but the evidence against me was overwhelming, carefully constructed by Michael. And I started unraveling, the stress and injustice and isolation taking its toll. I started having panic attacks, couldn't sleep, weight dropping, friends distancing because they believed the rumors. 6 months after being fired, I had a complete breakdown in public, screaming in a coffee shop about Michael Donovan, about the lies, about the conspiracy. And someone called the police, and the police called an ambulance, and I ended up in a psych ward for evaluation. Doctors diagnosed me with delusional disorder, said I was having persecutory delusions about Michael Donovan. And the more I insisted it was true that Michael destroyed me deliberately, the more it confirmed their diagnosis. And my parents, desperate and scared, agreed to the commitment, to long-term treatment. And I spent the next 5 years in Riverside Psychiatric Facility, an institution in upstate New York. 5 years of therapy, of medication, of being told that my perception of reality was distorted. And part of me started believing it, started questioning if maybe the doctors were right, if maybe I had imagined the affair, if maybe I was delusional. But there was a part of me, a small, stubborn part, that knew the truth, that held on to reality even when everyone said I was wrong. And slowly, I learned to play the game. Learned to say what the doctors wanted to hear. Learned to demonstrate insight into my delusions. And after 5 years, I was released, deemed stable, cured of the paranoia about Michael Donovan. And I walked out into the world with no money, no credentials, no support system, because my parents had given up, because my friends had moved on. But I had something I didn't have before. I had clarity. I had purpose. Because during those 5 years, in the moments of lucidity, I had decided that if I ever got out, I would prove the truth. I would destroy Michael Donovan just as he destroyed me. But before continuing with this story of rebuilding, of meticulously planned revenge, I want to pause. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, which city, which country. Because I love knowing who is part of this community, who is following me on this journey. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the perfect time, because this story has twists you won't want to miss. And in the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. I want to know your honest opinion about every choice I made, every step of this revenge. Now, let me continue, because I need to tell you how the girl who walked out of Riverside Psychiatric Facility, broken and destitute, transformed into Natasha Crawford, the consultant who is about to destroy Michael Donovan from the inside out. When I walked out of Riverside in 2018 at the age of 30, I had $243 in my pocket, clothes donated from charity, and a prescription for antipsychotics that I didn't need but had to pretend to take to maintain my release. And I had nowhere to go. My parents had moved to Arizona, changing their number and leaving no forwarding address because it was too painful, too shameful to have a daughter who had a breakdown. And friends from college, from work, all gone, all believing I was a crazy stalker who harassed poor Michael Donovan. The first few weeks were about pure survival. I stayed in a homeless shelter in the Bronx, an overcrowded place where I had to keep my few belongings in a locker, where the noise never stopped. I looked for jobs, anything, but without references, with a 5-year gap in my resume, with a psychiatric history, no one wanted to hire me. And honestly, part of me was tempted to give up, to sink into the despair that everyone expected of me. But then something happened that changed the trajectory. At the shelter, I met a woman named Rita, a 50-something ex-addict who had been homeless for years, but had recently gotten a job at a cleaning company. And Rita, for some reason, took an interest in me. Maybe she saw something. Maybe she just needed a friend. And she got me a job interview with her boss, a small cleaning company that worked in office buildings at night. And the owner, a man named Carlos, normally wouldn't hire people with my background, but Rita vouched for me, and he gave me a chance. I started working night shifts, cleaning offices in the financial district, scrubbing toilets, emptying trash, mopping floors. And the work was humiliating in ways I can't fully express, because 6 years earlier I was working at Sterling & Associates as a promising junior, and now I was cleaning the offices of people like the one I used to be. But it was also clarifying, because every night cleaning I had time to think, to plan. And I realized that to destroy Michael, I needed to be smart. I needed to be patient. I needed to rebuild completely. The first step was establishing a new identity, not legally, but practically. I started using my middle name, Natasha, that no one knew, combined with my mother's maiden name, Crawford. It wasn't official, but in daily life, in casual interactions, I was Natasha Crawford. And I saved obsessively from the cleaning job, living in the cheapest room I could find, sharing an apartment in Queens with 3 roommates, eating ramen and rice. After 6 months, I had saved enough to buy a used laptop, cheap but functional. And I started educating myself, online courses, everything free or cheap, learning about PR, about crisis management, about the manipulation of public perception. Ironically, learning the same skills that Michael used against me. And I also researched obsessively about Michael Donovan, tracking his career online. And I discovered that after destroying me, Michael rode a wave of sympathy, the poor executive who had dealt with an unstable employee. Within a year of my firing, he left Sterling & Associates and started his own company, Donovan Media Group, using Amanda's money. And the company grew rapidly, Michael's charisma and Amanda's capital combining to create a successful media and PR firm. And they had a son, Christopher, born 2 years after my commitment. A perfect family, a perfect life, built literally on the ruins of my life. And tracking Michael, learning about his company, became an obsession, but a functional obsession, an obsession that fueled a purpose. After a year of cleaning and studying, I applied for an entry-level position at a small PR firm, using the Natasha Crawford name, using Carlos as a reference. And I got the job, barely paying more than cleaning, but it was a foot in the door. It was a start in the industry again. And I worked insanely hard, proving my worth, taking any assignment, staying late, being indispensable. And my boss, a woman named Jennifer, eventually promoted me, gave me more responsibility. And after 2 years at that firm, I had a real portfolio. I had current experience. I had references. And I moved to a bigger firm, then a bigger one still. Each move strategic, each position teaching me more about the industry, building the credibility of Natasha Crawford. And simultaneously, I was working another angle. Therapy at Riverside, ironically, taught me a lot about psychology, about manipulation, about what makes people tick. And I used that knowledge to become exceptionally good at my job, at reading clients, at understanding how to spin narratives. 7 years after my release from Riverside, at 35, I had achieved something remarkable. Natasha Crawford was a recognizable name in certain PR circles, known as a fixer, as someone who could handle sensitive situations, crises that needed careful management. And my reputation was carefully cultivated, every client chosen strategically, every success publicized just the right amount. And financially, I was stable for the first time in my adult life, not rich but comfortable, renting a decent apartment, wearing appropriate clothes for the industry. But all the time, through the years, I kept watch on Michael. And I watched as Donovan Media Group grew, as it became one of the top boutique firms in NYC. I watched as Michael's marriage to Amanda appeared solid, public appearances always polished, always a united front. And I watched Christopher growing, occasional posts on Amanda's carefully curated social media, private school, sailing lessons, a privileged childhood. And I also tracked Michael's business dealings, contracts, clients, controversies. And Donovan Media Group had a few scandals over the years, nothing major, but whispers about aggressive tactics, about manipulating narratives perhaps too effectively. 6 months ago, the opportunity presented itself. Donovan Media Group faced a PR crisis when a former employee filed a lawsuit alleging workplace harassment. The lawsuit was eventually settled quietly, but the damage was done. Clients were nervous and their reputation needed rehabilitation, and they needed an outside consultant, someone without ties to the company, to help manage perception, rebuild trust. And through careful positioning, through the references I cultivated, through the reputation I built, I managed to be shortlisted for the position. The interview process was grueling, multiple rounds, meeting with various executives, all evaluating if I was the right fit. And I played the part perfectly, professional, competent, slightly detached. During the entire process, I didn't see Michael directly. He delegated to HR and other executives. The final decision came down to me and one other consultant. And I got the call 2 weeks ago, offering the position. A 6-month contract, generous pay, access to the inner workings of Donovan Media Group. And I accepted, calmly, professionally, as if it were just another job, just another client. But inside, I was exultant, because years of planning, of positioning, of rebuilding were finally paying off. And today, sitting in this lobby, waiting to shake hands with Michael Donovan for the first time in 12 years, I feel a mix of emotions. Nervousness, obviously, because if he recognizes me, everything falls apart. Excitement, because finally, after so much time, I am going to begin the active phase of my plan. And cold determination, because this man destroyed me, took years of my life, labeled me insane, and got away with everything. And now, I will systematically dismantle everything he built. Not quickly, not obviously, but carefully, strategically, just as he destroyed me. The receptionist calls my name, says Mr. Donovan is ready to see me. And I stand up, smoothing my perfectly tailored blazer, checking that the designer glasses Natasha Crawford always wears are straight, that the shorter, differently styled hair from Natalie Cross years ago is perfect. And I walk toward his office, every step measured, every breath controlled. And this is just the beginning, the first move in a game that will take months, maybe a year. But I have patience now. I have the skills. I have the plan. And Michael Donovan won't know what hit him until it's already too late, until he's already destroyed just as he destroyed me. And thinking about that, thinking about justice finally coming, makes every moment of the last 7 years, every sacrifice, every humiliation, absolutely worth it. Michael Donovan's office is at the top of the building, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan, designer furniture, awards and accolades strategically displayed. And he is standing behind a large desk when I walk in, 43 now, still handsome but aged in ways that the online photographs didn't fully capture. There are lines around his eyes, a slight paunch that the expensive suit tries to hide, his hair starting to recede at the front. And he smiles, that practiced executive smile, and extends his hand. Natasha Crawford, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard excellent things about your work. And I shake his hand, feeling revulsion, feeling rage, but maintaining a perfectly neutral, slightly cordial expression. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Donovan. I look forward to collaborating with your team. My voice came out smooth, controlled, without a hint of the tremor I feel inside. Michael gestures to a chair. I sit. He sits behind the desk. And for the next 45 minutes, we have a business discussion, him explaining the nature of the crisis, the lawsuit details, client concerns, and reputation damage. And I speak professionally, offering initial observations, discussing general strategies, demonstrating the competence I built over years. Throughout the meeting, Michael's demeanor is exactly as it would be with any consultant. Polite, professional, with no recognition, no spark of memory. And I watch him carefully, watching his body language, trying to understand if there is any suspicion. But there's nothing, absolutely nothing that suggests he sees Natalie Cross when he looks at Natasha Crawford. And it makes sense, because the transformation was thorough. Not just the hair and glasses, but I gained weight from medication at Riverside, then lost it differently through exercise rather than stress. My facial structure changed subtly with age, with different makeup application, with a different style of presentation. And most importantly, my mannerisms changed. The way I carry myself. Confident where Natalie was insecure, controlled where Natalie was eager. Natalie Cross wanted approval, wanted validation. Natasha Crawford exudes quiet competence, doesn't need anyone's approval. And they are different people, sufficiently so that Michael, who spent a total of maybe 100 hours with Natalie 12 years ago, doesn't connect the dots. The meeting concludes with Michael standing, shaking my hand again, saying he has a good feeling about the collaboration, that the team will meet with me tomorrow to begin the detailed work. I leave his office, walking down the hallway to the elevator, maintaining composure until the doors close. And then, alone in the descending elevator, I allow myself a small moment, a single deep breath of relief mixed with triumph. Phase 1 is complete. I'm inside. I have access. In the following days, I meet with various members of the Donovan Media Group team, learning the structure, understanding the power dynamics, identifying key players. There is Amanda, Michael's wife, who is still heavily involved on the financial business side, although she delegates most daily operations. I meet her briefly during the first week. Polished, controlled, every inch an Upper East Side heiress, and she's cordial in a detached way, clearly not seeing consultants as worthy of real attention. There are senior executives, VPs of various departments, all loyal to Michael, all invested in the company's success. And there is Christopher, Michael and Amanda's son, 21 now, recently joined the company in an entry-level position, being groomed to eventually take over. Meeting Christopher is strange because he wasn't born when Michael destroyed me. He is literally a product of the life Michael built afterwards. And Christopher is earnest, eager, clearly idolizes his father, clearly has been protected from knowing anything ugly about the family history. There is also James Park, the CFO, who initially seemed suspicious of an outside consultant, protective of the company's finances and secrets. And Sarah Martinez, head of HR, a woman in her 50s who seems genuinely kind but also pragmatic, aware that her job is protecting the company above everything. During these initial meetings, I'm absorbing everything, learning who trusts whom, where tensions exist, what skeletons might be hidden. And I begin seeing cracks in the perfect facade, nothing major yet, but hints. For example, James Park and Michael have obvious tension during a budget meeting. Amanda and Michael interact in a purely professional capacity, without warmth, the marriage clearly still a strategic partnership rather than a romantic one. And Christopher, despite his eagerness, seems slightly resentful of the nepotism assumptions, wanting to prove his worth. I also discover through casual conversations that there are former employee problems beyond just the lawsuit, whispers about others who left under questionable circumstances, settlements that were paid. And each piece of information is carefully cataloged, mental notes being made about potential pressure points, weaknesses. Michael himself continues to be perfectly professional with me, occasional meetings to discuss progress, always appropriate, always businesslike. And during one of these meetings, 2 weeks into the contract, he casually mentions something that makes my blood chill. "You remind me of someone, Natasha. I can't quite put my finger on who, but there's something familiar about you." My heart races, but I force a casual smile. I have one of those common faces, I guess. People always say that. And Michael laughs. Maybe. Anyway, I was thinking about the strategy you mentioned for client retention. And the conversation moves on, but the moment stays with me. A reminder that I am walking a tightrope, that a single slip could expose everything. And then, 3 weeks into the position, something happens that I hadn't anticipated, a variable I hadn't included in my careful planning. During a late evening at the office, most of the staff gone, I am reviewing documents in a small conference room when Christopher enters, looking stressed. "Sorry, I didn't know anyone was still here. I just needed a quiet place to think." I gesture to a chair. "It's all right, there's plenty of space." "Are you okay?" Christopher hesitates, then sits, and suddenly the words tumble out about the pressure, about trying to prove himself, about living in the shadow of his father's expectations. And I listen, not because it's part of the plan, but because I genuinely feel sorry for this young man who was not at fault for what happened to Natalie Cross. After he unloads, Christopher looks embarrassed. "Sorry, that was unprofessional. You don't need to hear my problems. Sometimes we all need to vent," I say gently. "And for what it's worth, I saw your work on the Davis account. You're doing well." Christopher smiles, grateful, and there is a brief moment of genuine human connection. In the following days, Christopher occasionally stops by to talk, seeking advice, sharing frustration. I develop a tentative friendship, or at least Christopher thinks so. This wasn't in the plan, but I realize it could be useful, that having Christopher confide in me gives insight into family dynamics. But I also feel a twinge of guilt, because Christopher is innocent, and whatever I do to Michael will inevitably affect Christopher too. I push the guilt aside because collateral damage is unfortunate but necessary, because Michael didn't consider my well-being when he destroyed me. After a month at Donovan Media Group, I am successfully positioned as a trusted advisor, with tangible work seen in rehabilitating the company image, the lawsuit fading from the headlines. Michael is clearly pleased, mentioned extending the contract beyond the initial 6 months. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned. And then, on a quiet Friday evening, working late again, I accidentally overhear a conversation. Michael's office door is not completely closed, and voices are carrying. It's Michael and Amanda, and the tone is heated, unusual for their usual controlled interaction. "I can't believe you were so careless." Amanda's voice sharp. "It was years ago, Amanda. It's been dealt with." Michael's response, "Has it really?" "Because I just got a call from Richard Sterling. He's considering writing a memoir. And guess what chapter he wants to include?" My heart starts pounding because Richard Sterling was the CEO of Sterling & Associates when Michael worked there, when everything happened to me. "He won't," Michael says, but there is uncertainty in his voice. "I'll make sure of it." "How? By buying him off like we bought the others?" "How long until money isn't enough, Michael? I will do whatever it takes to protect this family, this company, as I always have." Silence. Then Amanda's voice, colder. "Sometimes I wonder how many Natalie Crosses there are, Michael. How many lives you ruined to get here." I gasp before I can stop myself. A quiet sound, but in the silent hallway it carries. And the conversation stops abruptly, footsteps heading toward the door. I quickly move, pretending I was passing by, reviewing papers in my hand. Amanda emerges first, face flushed, sees me and composes herself. "Natasha, still working?" "Just finalizing some reports," I say calmly, even though my heart is racing. Amanda nods curtly, walks away. Michael appears in the doorway, looks at me searchingly, and I feel terror that maybe he heard my gasp. Maybe he suspects. But then he just says, "It's late. You should go home." Yes, I was about to leave. I gather my belongings, leave the building, my mind reeling, because the overheard conversation confirmed what I always knew, that Michael deliberately destroyed me, that it wasn't just an unfortunate situation, but a calculated move. And more, that Amanda knew, that she helped cover it up. And there are others, other victims Michael silenced through money, through intimidation. My original plan had been to slowly dismantle Michael's business, to destroy his reputation professionally. But now I realize that it needs to be more. It needs to be complete. It needs to expose every lie, every victim, every crime. And I also realize that I am not alone, that there are others out there who suffered because of Michael Donovan. And if I can find them, if I can convince them to come forward, then the revenge will be not just mine. It will be justice for all of us. Riding the subway back to my apartment, watching the city lights pass, I feel a shift in my mission, an expansion of purpose. I know the next steps. I know what needs to be done. Starting tomorrow, Natasha Crawford will become not just a consultant, but an investigator, gathering every piece of dirt on Michael Donovan, every skeleton in the closet, every victim silenced. And when I have everything, when the case is ironclad, I will blow everything apart, and Michael Donovan will lose not just his business, not just his reputation, but possibly his freedom. And the idea of systemic justice, of multiple victims finally being heard, energizes me in ways that simple personal revenge never could. And that, I realize, is how Natalie Cross will finally be put to rest. Not through becoming like Michael, but through ensuring Michael faces the consequences he evaded for 12 years. In the weeks following the overheard conversation, I began carefully investigating Michael's past, looking for the other victims Amanda mentioned. It started discreetly, using the access I had to company records, old HR files that I technically shouldn't be browsing, but managed to get through a combination of late nights and a password I observed Sarah Martinez typing. And I found patterns. Terminations that seemed suspicious, settlements paid through the company legal fund with NDAs attached. There were names, 5 of them over the course of 12 years since Donovan Media Group was founded. Sarah Chen terminated 2 years after the company started, a settlement of $40,000. Jennifer Williams terminated 3 years later, a settlement of $60,000. Robert Hayes, the only male victim, terminated 5 years ago, a settlement of $30,000. Linda Park terminated 3 years ago, a settlement of $100,000. And the motions were similar in each case. Allegations of misconduct against the employee, swift terminations, quick settlements before any public exposure. It was Michael's pattern, perfected after successfully destroying me, refined through practice. I began researching each person, tracking where they were now, what happened after they left Donovan Media. It took weeks of careful digging, using online searches, social media, and public record. Sarah Chen was working at a small marketing firm in Boston, her LinkedIn profile showing she rebuilt her career, but in a lower position than would have been expected. Jennifer Williams appeared to have left the industry completely, now running a small boutique in Portland. Robert Hayes was the hardest to find, eventually locating him in Chicago, working freelance, his social media footprint minimal. Linda Park was in Seattle, working for a nonprofit, also having left the corporate world. And looking at their trajectories, seeing how their careers were derailed, how their lives changed, I felt both validation, that I wasn't crazy, wasn't imagining a pattern, and also rage that Michael had done this not just to me, but repeatedly. The question was, how to approach them, how to contact them without raising suspicion, how to convince them to come forward when they had all signed NDAs, when they all clearly moved on or tried to. I decided to start with Linda Park because her settlement was the largest, suggesting either the allegations were the most serious or she had the most leverage. Using the pretense of a work trip to Seattle, I arranged to be in her area, and through careful online stalking, not the creepy kind, but the research kind, I found that Linda volunteered at a women's shelter 2 evenings per week. I showed up at the shelter, volunteering too, using the Natasha Crawford identity, slowly building rapport. After 3 weeks of casual conversations, carefully placed questions, Linda and I went out for coffee. And sitting across from Linda, a woman in her late 30s with tired eyes but a warm smile, I finally asked the direct question. Linda, I need to talk about something delicate. Did you ever work for Donovan Media Group? Linda's face immediately closed, walls going up. I don't discuss that period of my life. I signed an NDA. I know, and I'm not a journalist. I'm not trying to expose you. But I worked for DMG recently, and I saw things, patterns. And I think Michael Donovan is doing to others what he did to you. Linda studied me carefully. Who are you, really? A moment of decision, risky, but necessary. My name isn't important right now. But Michael Donovan destroyed my life 12 years ago, before he even started DMG. And I have been planning justice ever since. Linda was quiet for a long moment, then spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. He promised mentorship, then became inappropriate. When I rejected him, he started a campaign of destruction, manipulating others to think I was the problem, planting evidence, forcing me out, then offering a settlement to guarantee silence. Her story was eerily similar to mine, the details different, but the core pattern identical. Linda continued, I took the money because I needed it, because my reputation was destroyed, because I needed a fresh start. But I hate myself for the guilt, knowing that my silence allowed him to continue. What if there was a way to speak without technically breaking the NDA, to expose him without sacrificing yourself? I asked. Linda looked interested but skeptical. How? I explained the idea that had been forming, using my position inside DMG to gather evidence, bringing the victims together, not for a lawsuit initially, but to create a report, documentation that could be leaked to authorities, to the media, in a way that protected the individuals, but exposed the pattern. Linda hesitated. I have a new life now, a good job, stability. Messing with this could risk everything. I understand. But while we stay silent, he continues. There are others, Linda. And there will be more. Linda nodded slowly. Let me think about it. But if I decide to help, I would need absolute assurance that I wouldn't be the public face, wouldn't be exposed. I promised protection as much as possible, and we exchanged careful contact information, separate emails not connected to our real identities. Over the next 2 months, I made similar approaches to the others. Jennifer Williams in Portland was the most hesitant, her trauma being the most visible, her hands shaking when she discussed Michael. But she eventually agreed to contribute testimony anonymously. Robert Hayes in Chicago was surprisingly eager, bitter about how the situation destroyed not just his career, but his mental health, which led to hospitalization for depression. Sarah Chen in Boston took the longest convincing, but finally agreed when I explained I had a daughter now, and didn't want a world where men like Michael operated without consequence. And every person I spoke with, every story I heard, added layers to the understanding of Michael's pathology, of the systematic nature of his abuse. They all had similar experiences: grooming, inappropriate relationships, then destruction when the relationship ended or when they rebuffed his advances. I returned to New York with 4 out of 5 potential corroborating victims, each one willing to provide testimony under protection, each one carrying similar scars. I continued working at Donovan Media Group, maintaining the Natasha Crawford facade, attending meetings, and offering strategy. Michael increasingly trusted me, confiding about business concerns and occasionally personal frustration. And every conversation with him required acting, required pushing down the visceral hatred I felt. And then, 3 months into the engagement, a development happened that I hadn't anticipated. Christopher Donovan approached me in the hallway, looking nervous. "Natasha, can I talk to you privately?" I led him to an empty conference room. Christopher was pacing, agitated. Something about my father, and I don't know what to do with it. My heart pounded. Because what if Christopher discovered the truth? What if the entire plan was about to fall apart? "What did you find?" I asked carefully. Christopher pulled out a flash drive. "I was helping Dad organize old files for storage, and I found these. Email backups from years ago, before I was born. And there are threads, conversations with my mom about an employee, a woman named Natalie Cross, and the content is disturbing. Blood roaring in my ears, but I kept my face neutral. What did the emails say? Dad was discussing how to fabricate evidence against her, how to use connections to silence her. And my mom was advising, planning settlement strategy. And there was mention of others too, a pattern of behavior." Christopher looked destroyed, his world crumbling. "All this time I thought my father was a good man, an ethical businessman, but this is criminal." Carefully, precisely, I responded. "What are you going to do with this information, Christopher?" "I don't know. He's my father. But if this is true, if he ruined people's lives, I can't just ignore it." It was a moment where I could manipulate, where I could push Christopher to expose his father immediately, to blow everything up. But it was also a moment where I needed to be strategic, because Christopher acting impulsively could alert Michael, could give him time to cover up. "Christopher, this is enormous, and I understand you're overwhelmed. But you need to think carefully about the next step. If you're going to do something, it needs to be ironclad. It needs to protect you too. Could you help? You understand PR. You understand how to manage revelations like this." The irony, Michael's son asking for my help to expose Michael, but also the opportunity. "I can help, but I would need to see the evidence, to understand the full scope. And we would need to be very careful, because if your father finds out before we're ready, it could destroy everything." Christopher agreed, gave me the flash drive. "Please review it. Tell me if I'm being crazy, if I'm overreacting." I took the flash drive home that night, my hands shaking as I plugged it into my laptop as I opened the files. And there it was, all documented. Emails between Michael and Amanda planning my destruction, discussing how to manipulate HR, how to plant evidence. And there were references to others too. Sarah Chen specifically mentioned strategies for forcing her out. It was the evidence I needed, direct confirmation not just of the pattern but of malicious intent, of a conspiracy between Michael and Amanda. I also found financial records, payments to Richard Sterling, apparently for keeping quiet about knowing the truth, payments to a former HR manager at Sterling & Associates. Looking at the evidence, compiled over the years by Michael's own carelessness in not properly deleting, it felt like the universe was finally delivering justice. And now I had victims willing to testify, I had an insider in Christopher questioning everything, and I had documentary evidence. The pieces were finally in place to begin the endgame, for the systematic exposure that would destroy not just Michael's business, but potentially his freedom, Amanda's reputation and wealth, everything they valued. But I also knew I needed to be strategic about the timing, about how to roll it out, because one misstep and powerful people like the Donovans could still escape consequences. I spent the weekend organizing everything, creating a comprehensive report, a timeline of abuses, documented evidence, victim statements, and financial trails. I created multiple backups, stored in different locations, both physical and digital, ensuring that even if something happened to me, the information would get out. Monday morning, I returned to the office with renewed purpose, with clarity about exactly what needed to happen next. Christopher pulled me aside immediately. Did you review it? Yes. And Christopher, this is serious. More serious than you thought. Your father and your mother engaged in systematic abuse, cover-ups, and possibly witness tampering with those payments. Christopher looked sick. What should I do? We need to be strategic. First, we need to secure this evidence officially, maybe through a lawyer, deposited in a way that cannot be destroyed. Second, we need to decide whether to go to authorities or the media first. And third, you need to decide your own role, because this will destroy your family, professionally and personally. If it's true, then they deserve it. Justice deserves it. Christopher was resolute, but also clearly in pain. Over the next week, I helped Christopher find a lawyer, someone not connected to the Donovans, someone specializing in whistleblower cases. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to Sarah, reviewed the evidence and confirmed we had grounds for both criminal charges and civil suit. I also contacted the other victims through careful channels, explaining that I had an insider witness now, had documentary evidence, and asking if they would be willing to officially come forward with proper legal protection. One by one, each victim agreed, seeing a chance for real justice, for vindication. I also made a decision about my own identity. I decided it was time to reveal myself, to transform from Natasha Crawford back to Natalie Cross, to stand as the primary victim, the face of the case. The decision was terrifying because it meant exposing my own vulnerability. It meant admitting the psychiatric history that could be used against my credibility. It meant facing Michael directly. But it also felt necessary. Felt like the only way to truly close the chapter, to reclaim the name and identity that Michael tried to erase. The timeline was set, coordinated with the lawyer Patricia, with media contacts she trusted, with Christopher who agreed to testify against his parents despite his anguish. D-Day was scheduled for 2 weeks later. A meeting where everything would come out, where authorities would be present, where Michael and Amanda Donovan would face the consequences. Finally, those 2 weeks were the longest of my life, maintaining the facade at work, smiling in meetings with Michael, pretending everything was normal while the countdown ticked. Michael, oblivious, actually offered me a permanent position, praising my work, saying I had become invaluable to the company. And every praise was a knife twist, because I knew that in 2 weeks he would discover exactly who Natasha Crawford really was, and his world would collapse. The night before the scheduled revelation, I was in my apartment, unable to sleep, thinking about the 12-year journey from an innocent 23-year-old to a broken psychiatric patient to a rebuilt Natasha to finally reclaiming Natalie. And I was also thinking about the collateral damage, about Christopher, whom I genuinely cared about the other DMG employees who would lose jobs, about the complexity of justice when it involves more than just the primary perpetrator. But I was also thinking about Linda and Sarah and Jennifer and Robert and the countless others Michael harmed, and knowing that silence perpetuates abuse, that comfortable complicity allows predators to thrive. And I made peace with my choices, with the fact that justice is messy, that righteousness doesn't mean without cost, that doing the right thing often hurts innocence alongside the guilty. And I was ready finally, after 12 years, to face Michael Donovan not as a broken victim, not as a hidden consultant, but as Natalie Cross, survivor and accuser, ready to watch his everything burn. The morning of D-Day started like any other. I woke up at 6, got ready carefully, but this time not as Natasha Crawford. I wore simple clothes, jeans and a blouse, removed the glasses, left my hair in its natural style. Because today, I didn't need the disguise. Today, I would be Natalie Cross again. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the office of the lawyer Patricia Chen. Michael and Amanda were summoned under the pretense of a confidential discussion about an urgent legal matter related to the company. They didn't know that authorities would be present, that Christopher would be there, that 4 other victims would be connected via video conference. I arrived at Patricia's office at 9, my hands trembling slightly. Patricia greeted me, professional but with an expression of genuine empathy. "Are you ready for this, Natalie?" Using my real name for the first time in a professional context in 12 years was surreal. "I'm ready. I've spent 12 years preparing." In the conference room, Christopher was already there, pale but determined. He saw me without the Natasha disguise for the first time, and there was a moment of shock, then comprehension. You're Natalie Cross, the woman from the emails." I nodded. "I'm sorry I deceived you, Christopher. but I needed to be close enough to discover the truth. I understand, he said quietly. And I admire your courage. I don't know if I could have done what you did. Also present were Detective Sarah Morrison from the NYPD, specializing in white-collar crime, and Assistant District Attorney James Park, no relation to James Park from DMG. They had previously reviewed the evidence, determined that there were grounds for a criminal investigation. At 10 o'clock sharp, Michael and Amanda Donovan arrived, clearly irritated by the mysterious summons, accompanied by their lawyer, a man named Richard Bolton, notorious for defending executives in difficult cases. Michael walked into the room confidently, starting to speak. I hope this is truly urgent because I have an important meeting at 11. And then he saw me. He saw Natalie Cross, not Natasha Crawford. And confusion crossed his face, followed by slow, dawning recognition. Natasha? He said, uncertain. No, I replied, my voice firm. Natalie Cross. And I saw the exact moment when it clicked, when 12 years disappeared and he remembered, when he realized the implication. His face went pale, his eyes widening. Amanda also registered it, looking between me and Michael, starting to connect the dots. What is going on here? Bolton, their lawyer, demanded. Patricia stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Donovan, I am Patricia Chen, and I represent Miss Natalie Cross and several other individuals. You are here because substantial evidence has emerged of a pattern of harassment, fraud, witness tampering, and conspiracy related to your conduct over the past 12 years. This is absurd, Amanda said sharply. Natalie Cross is mentally unstable. She spent years in a psychiatric institution. Anything she says is delusional. Really? Patricia said calmly. Because we have evidence not only from Miss Cross, but documentary evidence, emails between you and your husband detailing exactly how you fabricated accusations against her, how you planted evidence, how you used connections to destroy her career. Patricia presented printed emails, the ones from the flash drive Christopher provided. Bolton took them, started reading, and I saw the color drain from his face too. Michael tried to bluster. They are taken out of context. They are... Dad? Christopher interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. They are not out of context. I read them all. I know what you did. Michael looked at Christopher, shock and betrayal written on his face. Christopher, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Christopher said. You destroyed innocent people to protect yourself, your image, and I won't stay silent about it. And then Patricia explained the full scope, not just my case, but 4 others, a pattern spanning years. And she connected Linda, Sarah, Jennifer, and Robert via video screen, each one providing a brief statement, describing their experiences, the similarities, the impact on their lives. Watching Michael's face during the testimonies was gratifying in a way I can't fully express, because I saw his fortress crumbling. I saw his invincibility evaporate. Amanda also struggled, trying to maintain composure but clearly shaken, realizing the scope of the exposure. Bolton tried to deflect, arguing NDAs, arguing the statute of limitations, arguing everything he could. But Patricia systematically countered each point, explaining that NDAs obtained through fraud were unenforceable, that the pattern of behavior established an ongoing conspiracy, that financial records showed possible RICO violations. Detective Morrison then spoke, informing the Donovans that a criminal investigation was being opened, that they would need to provide testimony, that assets could be frozen pending investigation. Michael finally broke, the facade completely gone, and he looked at me. Why, Natalie? Why go this far? You could have moved on, built a new life. All the rage, all the pain of 12 years surfaced. I had a life, Michael. I had a career. I had a future. I had my sanity. You took all of it. You didn't just fire me. You labeled me insane. You locked me in an institution for 5 years. 5 years of my life, gone, because you needed to protect your reputation. I'm sorry, he said, and it seemed genuine, but also desperate. I was scared. I was protecting my family. And how many other people did you destroy protecting yourself? I asked. How many careers did you ruin? How many lives did you damage? Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Then Amanda spoke, her voice controlled but cold. Natalie, I understand you feel wronged, but proceeding with this will hurt not just us, but the innocent employees of DMG. It will hurt Christopher. Mom, no, Christopher said firmly. Don't use me as a shield. I choose to stand on the right side of this. The meeting continued for 2 more hours, details being hammered out, charges being outlined, next steps being discussed. In the end, the Donovans left with Bolton, both silent, crushed. Christopher stayed, apologizing to me, to the other victims connected virtually, carrying a guilt that wasn't his to carry. In the following days, the story broke, carefully released through media contacts that Patricia coordinated. Headlines screamed, "Media mogul Michael Donovan accused of systematic harassment and cover-up. Multiple victims come forward against Donovan Media Group." The reaction was swift and brutal. Clients pulled contracts, board members resigned, stock value plummeted. Employees started leaving, rats of a sinking ship. Amanda distanced herself publicly, filing for divorce, claiming she didn't have full knowledge of her husband's actions, although the emails proved otherwise. But her lawyers were better. They managed to negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony against Michael. And Michael, without the support of Amanda's money, without company resources, without allies, faced charges alone. Bolton tried to fight, but the evidence was overwhelming. Christopher publicly denounced his father, resigned from DMG, and started working with authorities. The trial, when it eventually happened 6 months later, was a spectacle. Televised, a media circus, all the details exposed. I testified, calmly, clearly, describing everything. Psychiatric records were introduced, but this time as evidence of the harm Michael caused, not of my instability. Linda, Sarah, Jennifer, and Robert all testified, similar stories painting an undeniable path. Christopher testified, emotional but firm, presenting the documents, emails, and financial records. Michael's defense fell apart, his attempts at painting us as conspirators or opportunists, failing in the face of documentary evidence. The jury deliberated for only 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on multiple counts: fraud, conspiracy, witness tampering. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a woman named Margaret Reeves, was stern. "Miss Donovan, you used your position of power to systematically abuse and destroy individuals who trusted you. You manipulated systems designed to protect employees, twisted the truth, and caused immeasurable harm. Justice demands accountability." Michael was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Not long enough, in my opinion, to compensate for the years he took from me, but something. Amanda faced consequences too, not criminal due to the immunity deal, but socially and financially. The divorce was brutal, the prenup protecting much of Amanda's original wealth, but assets accumulated during the marriage were divided, and her reputation in social circles was destroyed. Christopher, after everything settled, approached me. "Natalie, I know nothing can undo what my father did, but I want to help somehow. Donovan Media Group is bankrupt, but there are some assets remaining. I want to establish a fund for victims of workplace harassment, in your name if you allow it." The gesture was touching, and I accepted, not for the money, but because transforming something built on corruption into a force for good felt like an appropriate ending. And when the dust finally settled, when Michael was actually behind bars, when all the victims had been acknowledged, compensated as much as possible, when justice had been served as much as the imperfect system allowed, I felt an empty. Not an emptiness in a bad way, but like the weight I carried for 12 years was suddenly gone, leaving a space I didn't know how to fill. And therapy helped, real therapy this time, not the forced treatment of Riverside. My therapist, Dr. Elena Santos, helped me process everything, helped me understand that revenge, even if justified, even if successful, doesn't magically heal. It doesn't erase trauma. "Natalie," she said during one session, "you achieved something remarkable. You didn't just get justice for yourself, but you helped others, changed the system slightly, made it harder for the next Michael Donovan to operate. But now you need to decide who you are beyond being a survivor, beyond being an avenger. Who is Natalie Cross in a world where Michael Donovan is irrelevant?" And the question haunted me, because for so long, my entire identity was built around this purpose, this goal. And now that I reached it, who was I? The months after Michael's trial were a period of strange adjustment. Suddenly, I no longer had a mission consuming every thought, no longer had an enemy to fight. And the discovery was unsettling because for 12 years, practically my entire adult life, my purpose was singular: destroy Michael Donovan. And now that it was accomplished, I felt unmoored. I continued working as a consultant, but this time under my real name, Natalie Cross. And business was surprisingly good, because the trial gave me notoriety, and companies wanting consultants who understood harassment issues, who had lived experience, started reaching out. I also became an advocate, speaking publicly about workplace harassment, about psychological manipulation, about the importance of believing victims even when they have psychiatric history. Christopher kept in contact, checking in periodically. He had started his own small consulting firm, deliberately distancing himself from the family legacy, trying to build something clean, something his own. And through him, I learned that Michael in prison was apparently having a hard time, the reality of the consequences finally setting in. Amanda remarried within a year, a wealthy finance executive, already reinventing her narrative, distancing herself from the unfortunate chapter with Michael. And the other victims also moved forward in their way. Linda continued in nonprofit work, but now also volunteering with harassment victims, using her experience to help others navigate. Sarah returned to the corporate world, this time at a company with strong anti-harassment policies, feeling safe. Jennifer kept her boutique, but found peace in creative work. Robert struggled more, his trauma being deeper, but he was in therapy, had a support system, and was slowly healing. A year after the trial, I was invited to speak at a conference on workplace ethics. After the presentation, a woman approached me, maybe early 40s, nervous energy. "Miss Cross, my name is Diana, and the story you told, it resonated deeply, because I am currently in a similar situation, a boss who is..." And we talked for an hour, Diana pouring out a story of manipulation, of inappropriate advances, of the beginning of a campaign to isolate her after she rejected him. I felt a familiar dread because it was happening again, a different perpetrator but the same pattern. I helped Diana, connected her with Patricia Chen, who took the case, helped her navigate the reporting, helped ensure she didn't end up like I did, silenced and destroyed. And realizing I could make a difference not only through my own story but through actively helping others, I found a new purpose, a new mission. I started a small organization, funded partly by the settlement money from the Donovans, partly by donations, focused on supporting workplace harassment victims, providing legal resources, emotional support, and advocacy. I named it the Rosa Foundation, after my grandmother who always believed in me even when my own parents gave up. The Rosa Foundation grew beyond expectations, helping dozens, then hundreds of people navigate situations similar to the one I faced. The work was simultaneously fulfilling and triggering, every new victim's story bringing back my own memories, but also providing a sense that my suffering hadn't been meaningless, that I could transform pain into protection for others. I also slowly began rebuilding my personal life beyond work, beyond advocacy. I started dating tentatively, therapy helping me navigate my trust issues. I met someone, Alex, an architect, ironically, bringing full circle the original dream of a career in architecture. Alex was patient, understanding when I explained my history, when I needed space, when I had bad days. "Remember, you are the strongest person I know," Alex said once, "and not despite what you went through, but including it. Everything you survived, it formed who you are." The comment was profound because I had spent so much time viewing the past only as trauma, as damage, but Alex was helping me see how it was also evidence of resilience, of the capacity for survival, for growth. Our relationship developed slowly, carefully, both respecting boundaries, both growing together. 3 years after the trial, on the exact anniversary of Michael's sentencing, I organized a gathering. I invited Linda, Sarah, Jennifer, Robert, Christopher, Patricia, Dr. Santos, Alex, and some volunteers from the Rosa Foundation. It wasn't a celebration exactly, but a commemoration, an acknowledgement of the journey, of the. During the gathering, each person shared where they were now, how far they had come. Robert announced that he was publishing a memoir about his experience, hoping to help other male victims feel less alone. Jennifer showed photos of her boutique expansion, a thriving business. Sarah talked about being promoted to VP at her company, using her position to implement better policy. Linda mentioned that she was considering running for city council, wanting to create systemic change. Christopher shared that his small firm was doing well, that he was in a serious relationship, that he was in therapy processing his family trauma. When my turn came, I looked at the room of people, some of whom started as part of a revenge plan, but had become genuine friends, a genuine support system. 3 years ago, I was on this journey for justice, and we achieved it. Michael is in prison. Amanda faced consequences. The pattern was exposed. And honestly, I thought that would be the end, that justice would feel like complete resolution. But I learned that justice is just one part of healing, that real recovery is ongoing, is building the life you want, not just destroying the life that stole mine. And I am grateful for each of you, for the roles you played, for the support, for the solidarity. And I am proud of what we built together, of the Rosa Foundation, of the advocacy work, of the fact that it's harder now for the next predator to operate without consequence. The gathering continued, stories and laughter and occasional tears, and I felt a sense of community, of belonging that I hadn't felt since before Michael destroyed. And that night, after everyone left, Alex and I sat in my apartment, city lights twinkling outside. You thought about what you said earlier? Alex asked. About healing being on constantly, because even now, 3 years later, I still have nightmares sometimes. I still have moments where I see someone who looks like Michael and panic sets in. I still question myself, wonder if I deserved what happened, even though rationally I know I. Healing isn't linear, Alex said gently. And you don't have to be perfectly healed to be happy, to have a good life. The comment struck me because I had been holding myself to an impossible standard, thinking I had to completely overcome the past before deserving. Then 4 years after the trial, Michael came up for a parole hearing. Patricia reached out, asked if I wanted to provide a statement, to testify against. And I thought about it carefully, because part of me wanted him to stay in prison the longest possible, wanted maximum punishment. But another part of me, the part that had been growing through therapy, through building a new life, tired. Tired of being angry, tired of being defined by what Michael did. I decided to testify, but not just against parole. I testified about the harm, yes, about the ongoing impact, but also about how I used the experience to help others, about the. And I didn't explicitly say grant parole, but I didn't fight against it with every fiber like I would have years before. The parole board ultimately denied it, deciding Michael needed to serve more time. The news came, and I felt nothing. Not triumph, not disappointment, just neutral acceptance. And Alex noted, "You're different," he observed. "Since the parole hearing, more at." "I think I'm finally letting go," I responded. Not forgetting, no, but letting go of the need for Michael's punishment to be central to my happiness. 5 years after the original trial, at a point where Michael was halfway through his sentence, Patricia called with. Michael was seriously ill, cancer, terminal. Doctors were giving him 6 months maybe. I hung up the phone, processing the information, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me felt cosmic justice, karma. Part felt nothing. And a small part, surprisingly, felt sadness, not for Michael specifically, but for the waste of a life, for the damage he caused that rippled to so many. Patricia called again a few days later. Michael was requesting to see me, wanting to make amends before death. My immediate instinct was to refuse, because why would I grant him? But then I considered it, talking with Dr. Santos, with Alex, with friends from the Rosa Foundation. The consensus was that the decision was entirely mine, with no pressure either way. I ultimately decided to visit, not for Michael's benefit, but for mine, to see if a final conversation would provide the closure that still eluded me. I drove to the federal medical facility where Michael was being held, went through security, and was led to a room where he lay, barely recognized. Cancer had ravaged him, the once powerful man now frail, skeletal, hooked up to my. He opened his eyes when I entered, recognition immediate despite the. "Natalie," he whispered, his voice weak. "Thank you for coming. Didn't think you." I sat, maintaining. "I didn't come for you, Michael. I came for me. I understand. I want to say I'm sorry. I know the words are inadequate. I know nothing can undo it, but I need you to know that I spent every day in prison regretting it, understanding finally what I took from you." "You understand?" I asked, skepticism clear. "How could you possibly understand 5 years of institutional hell, of being labeled insane, of losing?" "I can't," he admitted. "But I lost everything too now. I lost my family, I lost my freedom, I lost my. And in losing, I started understanding that the power I thought I had, the control, was an illusion. And the damage I did not just to you but to others, to my own son. It haunts me." I looked at the dying man, the man who once held power over my life, now powerless, and pity. Not forgiveness, not quite, but, "Michael, you asked for forgiveness, and I can't give it." What you did was unforgivable. But I can say that you no longer occupy the space in my mind that you used to. I'm beyond you, beyond what you did. And that, I think, is better revenge than any prison. Michael nodded, tears. You are remarkable, Natalie. Stronger than I ever was. And I hope that whatever comes after you find peace. I left after that, not prolonging it, having said what needed to be said. Driving home, I felt a release, the final severing of the cord that tied me to Michael Donovan. When he died 3 months later, the news barely read. He was a footnote in my life, not a defining chapter. 6 years after the trial, the Rosa Foundation had helped over 1,000 people, had chapters in 3 cities, and had a staff of dedicated advocates. I was invited to appear on a national talk show, discussing my work, discussing my job. During the interview, the host asked a question that made me, Natalie, looking back, do you regret anything? The method of revenge? The years spent planning? I considered carefully before responding. Regret is complicated. I wish the trauma never happened, absolutely. I wish Michael never had the power to hurt me, to hurt. But given that it happened, do I regret the way I handled it? Partially. Because revenge, even if justified, consumed years that could have been healing, growing. If I could do it over, I think I would report immediately, fought through proper channels from the. But I also understand that wasn't an option I saw then, that systematic abuse makes victims feel powerless, makes revenge seem the only path to age. And what I don't regret is using the experience to help others, to create change, to ensure the next Natalie has resources I didn't have. The interview was seen by millions, and messages poured in. Support, gratitude, other victims sharing stories. And one message in particular stood out. It was from a person claiming to be a friend of Michael's family, saying that Christopher had mentioned wanting to reconnect, that he had something important to share. After an exchange of a few emails establishing legitimacy, Christopher and I met for coffee, and he told me that after his father's death, he had found letters, ones Michael wrote in prison but never sent, addressed to me. I don't know if you want to read them, Christopher said, offering an. But I thought you deserved the. I took the letters home, hesitated for days before opening them. And when I finally did, I found pages in Michael's handwriting, deteriorating as his illness progressed. The letters were rambling at times, but consistent themes emerged. Regret, acknowledgement of the harm, attempts to explain, not excuse, his mind. And one passage struck me particularly. Natalie, I built an empire on a foundation of lies, of broken people, of cruelty disguised as. And in the end, the empire crumbled, as it does. But what didn't crumble was your. You survived, you thrived, you helped. And that proves that despite everything I tried to destroy, something fundamental in you remained unbreakable. And it is that quality, that strength, that will be remembered long after I'm forgotten. Reading the words, I set the letters aside. They didn't offer closure I hadn't already found, but they offered confirmation that sometimes, very rarely, perpetrators face their own demons, acknowledge their harms. It doesn't undo the damage, it doesn't erase the years, but it offers a small piece of validation, of acknowledgement. Life continued, each year bringing more healing, more growth. The Rosa Foundation expanded to national advocacy. The relationship with Alex deepened, eventually moving in together, building a home based on trust and equity. I maintained friendships with the other victims, supporting each other through the ongoing. I occasionally spoke publicly, telling my story not to sensationalize, but to educate. On the 10th anniversary of the original exposure of Michael, I organized a large conference, bringing together victims, advocates, and legal experts, discussing systemic changes. And during the conference, I took a moment to reflect publicly. 10 years ago, the truth came out, and it has been a decade of justice, of healing, of growing. And I want to say to anyone currently in an abusive situation, you are not alone. Help exists. Speaking up is hard, the hardest thing possibly, but silence only protects abusers. And for survivors, healing is not linear, not quick, but possible. And you can build a life beautiful and meaningful beyond the. I am living proof of. 11 years after exposing Michael, I was living a life that teenage Natalie would have been proud of. The Rosa Foundation was thriving. My relationship with Alex was solid. I had built a respectable career, and I had a peace that once seemed impossible. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday in March, I received an email that sent everything spinning. It was from Amanda Donovan, the first direct contact since her divorce, The subject line was simple. We need to talk. The email was, Natalie, I know the last thing you want is to hear from me. But I discovered something about Michael, about what really happened all those years ago, something that changes everything you thought you knew. Please meet me. My instinct was to delete, block, and pretend I never received it. But curiosity nagged, because what possibly could Amanda reveal that would change? After days of deliberation, discussing it with Alex, with Dr. Santos, with Patricia, I decided to meet. A public cafe, daytime, with Alex nearby as backup. Amanda arrived looking different from how I remembered, older obviously, but also softer somehow, less polished armor. She sat across from me, ordered a coffee, and delayed for a moment before. Thank you for coming. I wouldn't have in your. Get straight to the point, Amanda. I said calmly but. What is so Amanda pulled a folder from her. After Michael died, I was going through his remaining belongings, things from. And I found these, his diaries, from years before we met, from when he was in college, his early. Why would that concern me? Because, Amanda said, her voice shaking slightly, it explains a lot. Natalie, Michael was abused, severely, by his mentor in college, a professor who groomed him, manipulated him, then destroyed him when Michael tried to end things. And the entire pattern that he used against you, against others, he learned because it was done to. She opened the folder and offered the. And hesitantly, I began. It was a detailed account, Michael's own words, describing years of psychological manipulation by the professor, an inappropriate relationship, then the systematic destruction of his reputation when he tried to report. And reading, I felt an unwelcome pang of recognition because the pattern was indeed identical. Michael had been a victim too, a cycle of abuse perpetuating it. This doesn't excuse what he did, Amanda said quickly. Nothing excuses. But I thought you should know that it wasn't random cruelty. It was learned behavior, a distorted trauma. I put the papers down. Why are you showing me this now? What do you hope to accomplish? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe guilt. Because I knew about Michael's past, knew he had been hurt. But I chose to ignore it, chose to benefit from the wealth and status without questioning them. I was complicit, not just in the cover-ups, but in enabling a cycle of. And seeing how the Rosa Foundation helps victims, it made me confront my own. So this is about your conscience, I said, an edge of bitterness in my. Partly, yes, Amanda confessed. But I also think understanding the cycles of abuse, understanding how victims become perpetrators, is important for. And I thought, as an advocate, you could use this information. I took the diaries, not to excuse Michael, but because Amanda was right. Understanding the cycles was. After Amanda left, I sat in the cafe, processing the It didn't change the fundamental facts. Michael had destroyed me, had hurt others, and had deserved the consequences. But it added a layer of complexity, of tragedy, because Michael had also been broken, and instead of healing, he had perpetuated. I shared the information with the Rosa Foundation board during the next meeting. The discussion was heated, some arguing that perpetuating the cycle doesn't diminish responsibility, others arguing that understanding the trauma roots was crucial for. I think both are true. Michael was a victim who became a perpetrator, and that doesn't absolve him, but it informs how we approach prevention, how we identify at-risk individuals early, how we break the cycles before they cause more damage. And the Rosa Foundation expanded its programming, adding a focus on the rehabilitation of perpetrators, on identifying warning signs, and on early It was a controversial decision, some survivors feeling betrayed that we were helping people like. But I maintained that preventing the next victim was just as important as supporting current. And 2 years later, at 43, 13 years after exposing Michael, I was in a place profoundly different from where I started. Not just a survivor, but an advocate. Not just angry, but compassionate. Not just defined by trauma, but enriched by the growth since. Christopher, now thriving in his own career, married with a child on the way, occasionally reached. You knew my father better than I did, he said once, both as a victim and as the person who understood him more deeply than anyone. And you gave me permission to hold both truths, that he hurt people terribly, but he also was human, flawed. And I realized that this, ultimately, was the most profound lesson, that people are rarely simply villains or heroes. They are complex. They are products of circumstances and choices. They are capable of both harm and the years continued passing. The Rosa Foundation helping thousands. My life with Alex deepening, occasionally speaking publicly, always advocating. And every survivor helped, every predator prevented, every cycle broken, felt like honoring not just my own experience, but every victim who hadn't survived, hadn't found justice, hadn't had reason. And 17 years after everything started, after Michael destroyed me, after years of planning revenge, after the exposure and trial, after the healing and growth, I stood again at a conference, this time a keynote speaker at a national summit on workplace ethics. And sharing my story, not just the harm but also the healing, not just Michael's crimes but also the complexities, not just the revenge but also the reconstruction. The audience was a mix of survivors, advocates, HR professionals, business leaders, all listening. My story, I said, started with destruction. A powerful man abusing his position, destroying an innocent person for self-preservation. And it could have ended with only more destruction, my descent into permanent bitterness, or perhaps even. But I chose a different path. A path of strategic justice, of holding accountable, of building something meaningful from. Learned that justice, real justice, is not just punishing wrongdoers. It is creating systems where abuse is less likely to occur. It is supporting victims to reclaim their lives. It is understanding the cycles of harm to break them. It is choosing every day to build rather than destroy. And for the survivors in the audience, I want. You do not owe forgiveness to perpetrators. Justice does not require reconciliation. Healing does not mean forgetting. But I hope you find, as I found, that life beyond trauma is possible, is rich, is worth fighting for. The standing ovation that followed was emotional, cathartic. And afterward, dozens approached, sharing stories, seeking advice, thanking me for my voice, for my. Driving home that night, Alex in the passenger seat, I felt a profound sense of. Not because the story had a perfect ending, because it never does. Trauma doesn't disappear, scars remain, occasional nightmares. But because I transformed suffering into purpose, used the pain to prevent others' pain, and built a life that honored the girl Michael tried to. You're smiling, Alex observed. Good life. Despite everything, somehow, a good 20 years, 2 full decades since that Friday in October when Michael Donovan destroyed life. And today, at 43, sitting in the office of the Rosa Foundation's headquarters in Manhattan, not far from where Donovan Media Group used to stand, I am reflecting on an extraordinary. The Rosa Foundation now operates in 15 cities, has helped over 5,000 victims of workplace harassment and abuse, lobbied successfully for stronger legislation, and changed corporate policies in hundreds of. And the staff of 60 people, a mix of survivors and allies, are all committed to the mission. This morning, I was reviewing applications for the Rosa Foundation Fellowship, a program we started 5 years ago, providing funding and mentorship to survivors who want to start their own advocacy and reading through the applications, each story unique but also familiar, themes of power abuse, of institutional failure, of human resilience. I felt a deep gratitude that I could offer resources that I didn't have when I needed. One application particularly stood out, a young woman named Maria, 25, who had escaped a controlling relationship, survived assault, and now wanted to create a support network for Latinas. Her essay was powerful, raw, and reminded me intensely of my own younger self. I approved the application immediately, added a personal note offering direct mentorship. Because paying it forward, helping the next generation of advocates, felt like the most meaningful aspect of. Alex entered the office carrying lunch. After 12 years together, he still surprises me with small gestures, maintaining romance even in the daily. We got married 3 years ago, a small ceremony with close friends. Nothing elaborate, but profoundly. How's the day going? Alex asked, kissing the top of my head before sitting. Good. Productive. Just approved a new fellow. Remember I mentioned. Latina survivor, wants to start a network? Yes, you seem... She reminds me so much of who I was, Alex. Angry, determined, a little... And to think that I can help her navigate, provide resources, maybe spare her some of the mistakes. You didn't make mistakes, Alex said gently. You survived impossibly difficult circumstances. You did the best you could. I know, I responded. But sometimes I wish yourself had had a mentor, had had a support system. It would have made... In the afternoon, I had a meeting with Patricia Chen, still a close friend and legal advisor for the family. We were discussing a new legislative push, a bill that would strengthen whistleblower protections for harassment. We have a good chance of passing it, Patricia said, spreading documents across the table. Support from both parties, the business community mostly on board, survivor advocacy groups united. Your testimony during the hearings was When are the hearings for the final vote? 3 weeks. And Natalie, there's something... I received an inquiry from a documentary filmmaker wanting to do a piece about your case, about the foundation, about the broader issues. Interested? I hesitated. It's already been so much exposure. Not sure I want to rehash everything. I understand, but the filmmaker is Emmy-winning, respected, and the focus would be not just your story, but systemic issues, other survivors, the progress made. It could reach audiences that current advocacy doesn't. Let me think about it, said. And Patricia nodded, understanding that big decisions still required careful consideration even after years. That night, discussing the documentary with Alex, processing the pros and... The last time you shared your story publicly, Alex noted, was 3 years ago at the conference. And you said afterward that it was cathartic, but also exhausting, reliving the trauma. Exactly. And part of me just wants to live without constantly being defined by what happened. Then say no, Alex said simply. You've already done more than anyone could expect. You're not obligated to keep sharing. But I also knew that the documentary, if done well, could help countless others. And I always told survivors that sharing was a choice, never an obligation, but also a powerful tool when ready. And perhaps I was ready for a final large-scale telling, a comprehensive account that could serve as an education. After a week of deliberation, I agreed to the documentary with clear boundaries, editorial control over my portions, a focus on broader issues, not just personal trauma. Filming was an intensive process. Interviews, gathering old footage and photos, connecting with other survivors. During filming, I met with Linda, Sarah, Jennifer, and Robert, now all in their 40s, all having built lives beyond. Seeing them, hearing their updates, reinforced that recovery was possible, that the circle of survivors had become a genuinely caring support. Christopher also participated in the documentary, offering the perspective of a family member, discussing his own journey of confronting his father's crimes and rebuilding an identity separate from the... He now had 2 children and was purposefully raising them with an awareness of consent, of respecting boundaries, of breaking... And a year after filming concluded, the documentary premiered at a major film festival, then released on a streaming... The response was overwhelming. Millions of views, conversations sparked, survivors reaching out, saying they felt seen, felt validated. And more importantly, the documentary led to concrete changes, companies revamping policies, universities updating procedures, and legislators citing it. The Rosa Foundation received a surge of donations, applications for help, and volunteers offering services. I also received criticism, some arguing I focused too much on the personal revenge aspect, that I should have reported immediately rather than planning the elaborate exposure. And the criticism was valid in ways, because my journey was not perfect, my methods were sometimes questioned. But I also knew that judging choices made in the midst of trauma, without resources, without support, and I responded graciously to critics, acknowledging imperfections while defending the right for each survivor to find their own. And now, 22 years after the beginning, at 45, my life has settled into a rhythm that feels sustainable. Work with the foundation continued, but I also had a life outside. Hobbies, friends, travel. I occasionally still had nightmares, still had moments of anxiety when I saw certain types of men in suits, still care. But I also had the tools to manage. I had support. I had perspective that only time and healing. I received an email from Maria, the fellow I mentored, sharing that she successfully launched her network, already helping dozens of Latinas. And reading about her successes, I felt a circle completing, a torch being passed to the next. And writing these final words, reflecting on the extraordinary journey from an innocent 23-year-old to a broken victim to a determined avenger to a healed advocate, I feel deep gratitude. Not gratitude for the suffering, never that, but gratitude for surviving, for finding the strength, for building something meaningful, for help. And for anyone reading this, any survivor questioning if recovery is possible, if justice is achievable, if life beyond trauma exists, I want to say with absolute certainty, yes, it is possible. It is hard, it is nonlinear, it requires resources and support and time, but it. And for the perpetrators, for anyone abusing power, exploiting vulnerabilities, manipulating systems, know that victims are stronger than they appear, that truth eventually emerges, that consequences, even if delayed. And my name is Natalie Cross. I survived Michael Donovan. I rebuilt my life. I helped thousands of others. And that, ultimately, is the best revenge of all. To live well, to live meaningful, to live beyond the limits that abusers tried. And now, we come to the end of this journey. 22 years of struggle, of healing. Tell me in the comments, rate this story from 0 to 10. Share if you or someone you know faced similar situations, if this story resonated. And if you are in an abusive situation now, please reach out. Resources exist, help is available. You are. And thank you for listening, for witnessing, for being part of this community, because sharing stories, breaking silences, and supporting survivors, that is how we change culture, that is how we prevent the next victims, that is how we heal. And remember, wherever you are on your own journey, whether in the middle of a struggle, in healing or in thriving, you have a power you don't even imagine. You have a worth that no one can diminish. You have a future that you can. And just as Michael Donovan became my nightmare, you can become the nightmare of your own demons. You can reclaim your power. You can choose who you will be beyond the trauma. Thank you. And may you find peace, justice, and healing on your own journey.